Right. The country is inching closer to the 2026 local government elections later this year. Auditor-General Tsakani Maluleke has delivered a stark warning. Municipal collapse is no longer an abstract governance failure, but a reality for millions of citizens that have been denied basic services. Addressing delegates at the FW de Klerk Foundation's annual conference, Maluleke said persistent financial mismanagement, leadership instability, and disregard for the rule of law had hollowed out the local government, deepening public mistrust and leaving communities to pay the price through broken infrastructure, stalled housing projects, and even unreliable water and sanitation services. Professor Alex van den Heever, governance expert at the Wits School of Governance, joins us now as we just talk about whether the coalitions could actually be part of this problem. Prof, what do you think? I mean, you see cities like Johannesburg, for example, cycling through mayoral changes and happening continuously. Does that not undermine the continuity and the long-term planning, for example?
So I think there are coalitions and coalitions, and I think that we have to look at whether or not a coalition has been constructed on the basis of patronage. In other words, a kind of a shared distribution of the sort of the resources of that particular municipality, rather than in delivering to the public. And so we are, on the one hand, there's been a switch in the electoral from the electorate away from a sort of a single incumbent to a myriad of additional smaller parties, but those parties haven't necessarily involved a movement away from patronage, which has destroyed the integrity of many municipalities and provinces in South Africa. So we're seeing failure because there's a failure at the leadership level, largely due to the fact that people who shouldn't be in those positions are appointed into those positions, and for the wrong reasons. So coalitions will be part of both the problem and the solution going forward. But the question really is whether the electorate learns about the coalitions that they're voting for, the parties they're voting for, and what they do with their vote. Because what has happened to date, if we look at Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, and Nelson Mandela Bay, and lots of the smaller ones, we see terrible failures of governance and performance.
Yeah, but one wonders, because it feels as though, Prof, that we're going to have this trend of hung councils or maybe just coalitions happening even more from here on in. It feels that way. There's no one to know for sure. That's for sure. Then it feels like it's going to be the norm as opposed to the exception. Is it not a case of better leadership?
So the question is whether now the configuration of a coalition is new to South African politics. So the electorate starts to learn what they're getting with a particular configuration. And if they get a disaster in terms of service delivery, provided our elections remain free and fair, it's quite possible that there will be a change in who they vote for, and which will change the incentives as to how parties behave. So that's where the solution comes down the line. But what we do see is a fundamental difference between the coalitions based on patronage and those that are not based on patronage. So that is important. Those that are based on patronage destroy their municipalities. And there's corruption rife all the way through all the areas of delivery. That's what we're seeing now, the water outages, and suddenly you have a proliferation of water tankers that are there on dodgy contracts. We have the same on power distribution. We have the non-collection of revenue, all of those things. We have certain municipalities like Witsabola which haven't paid pensions on behalf of their own staff. They don't pay their salaries. And government has cut off their funding from the municipal equitable share allocation, which has said it's identified a number of municipalities where it's going to do that because they are not paying the bulk suppliers out of their revenue. So it's being cut off and kept at the top sliced, and kept it national, because it's money that's coming from national going to municipalities. And what they've said is, well, we're going to cut out the middleman and we're going to directly pay the bulk suppliers. And all of that, if you had to look at the nature of the coalitions and the nature of the party that's in charge, they are corrupt. And the electorate has to eliminate the corrupt parties from the system in order to get service delivery. That's what a democratic system is based on. So the fact that we might have coalitions that are based on delivery won't necessarily create this instability. It can create profound stability down the line. And the differences might be more on emphasis. In other words, values and focus on what to emphasize in terms of community development. It can and so policy differences rather than on how much can you pay me to vote for your mayor through dodgy tenders and appointments of my friends into the municipality, which is what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's what we have to do is have, I mean, in essence, we've got a system in which the electorate is meant to be the fundamental controller of the behavior and the incentives of the people in the executive of government and in the municipal councils and in the provinces and the parliaments, etc. That's our control. And what we have to do is prevent people from stealing public money and taking advantage of the authority they get given over public resources and diverting those resources to themselves. So we have a problem to eliminate.
Sure.
But we know where it's coming from. It's bad actors that are being elected into government, and we need to stop electing them.
Yeah, and I suppose the difficulty with all of that, though, Prof, and I think I completely agree with you, and I think a lot of people certainly would. The problem is, we've given up so much in some areas that we end up not voting at all. So the voter apathy then exists. And that perhaps then creates an even worse cycle, surely.
So that would be problematic because not voting means that you've abdicated the control you have over the behavior of government. That is not a solution.
Yeah.
That is abdication and in fact just hands over government to the crooks that remain. So in essence, what people have to be doing, because that's what we have, we've got the power. There's no need to have like a revolution because the revolution is in the election. You can kick the government out. You don't have to shoot them out. So so what people have to do is to be active and organize and make sure that they have a strategic vote that focuses on people who will deliver. And magically, South Africa has a lot of resources. It has the tax base and it has the resources in all of the municipalities and at national and provincial government to run wonderful public services. We should have first-rate public services, continuous delivery of water, safe and cheap delivery of energy. All of that we should be getting with the resources that we have. We haven't got it because we've been lazy about who we've selected and put in the position of government power. And basically, people have to exercise their power. And if they abdicate, the people who remain to vote are going to be the ones that select the government. Doesn't stop a government from being in power. But what it means is that you don't have the people who should be there. So essentially, that's what people have to do, certainly going into municipal elections. The problem sits at who is being elected, who is sitting there with the purse strings. And if you don't stop them, they will carry on. And the problem is that it has gone quite deep, because when you've got municipalities that structurally fail, it means that there has been a collapse of leadership at the top level, and the resources are being stolen. So it makes it look as if there isn't enough tax money, but the money is there.
Yeah, and I think so many people have often said that actually the money is there. There shouldn't be as much pressure on the coffers or on the fiscus, because actually the money exists. It's where it's going to, who's actually using it. And as you said, even that patronage. And I want to follow again on that notion, because we've seen maybe there are a few more accountability measures in place, for example, right now. We've seen the referrals to the Hawks, to the SIU, for example, enforcement. However, still feels like it's remaining slow. It remains something that doesn't happen as much. Is that one of the key mechanisms now, outside of voting itself, which, as you made note of, is one of the most pivotal ones? Are those going to have to be the most important mechanisms in place for us to keep people to account?
They are critical, but as we've seen with the Maluleke Commission, and what we've seen quite recently during this week, where a particular senior official in the city the city of Johannesburg, who was arrested for fraud with money in bags from that were numbered by the South African Reserve Bank, which no private person is meant to have. And the prosecution was just stopped. And so there's a problem with the NPA and how it's functioning. So we've got a governance problem in enforcement. And what we've seen with Mandlanga is that the people who get involved in these syndicates that are stealing money from the provinces and from the municipalities and from national government have a lot of money to bribe people all the way up the system and close it down. So we have to remove conflicts of interest all the way through. We have to make sure that the people that we appoint into government are not criminals and are not susceptible to criminals. So part of that means structurally changing the relationship between the executive and the administration so that you don't have people who are able to manipulate the structures of government by appointing a whole network of people who are going to basically close down investigations. The investigations are an important accountability structure, but it depends on whether or not those accountability structures are insulated from influence. So it should be part of the solution. We are seeing that it doesn't work at full pace. And it's going to be absolutely crucial. South Africa's economic growth, we are already about, relative to our peer countries, we're about 35%. There's a 35% differential from where we should be relative to a starting point of about 2009. We've lost a huge amount of economic growth and development because of this corruption. And in essence, it comes down to who we've put in government.
Whew. That, I think, tells a big story. Just to close out, maybe I can return back to where we started this conversation and around coalitions. Given that they're here to stay, how can South Africans perhaps design mechanisms to ensure stability in councils and financial accountability in all of those municipalities as well, do you think, Prof?
So one can think that it's a technical solution, but in essence, it's about the quality of the people who are elected, because they drive at the moment the leadership structure of all of these arrangements. Municipalities are complex and different from provincial governments in that they have to raise their own revenue substantially. And that revenue is actually used to pay for bulk services. So if you stop collecting revenue properly because of corruption, and you start disrupting the provision of services because you can no longer afford to provide them because you haven't collected enough money to fund them, you go into a financial death spiral. It's what we're seeing in quite a few municipalities. We're seeing it in the city of Johannesburg. And suddenly they can't actually fund their critical services anymore. So the difficulty here is poor leadership in a municipal government is catastrophic because it cuts their revenue down. So City Power is potentially an insolvent organization, and so is the Joburg Water. So in every area where we start seeing these holes in the ground that never get repaired, roads that never get repaired, budgets that can't actually cover the cost of maintenance in places like Johannesburg, whereas in Cape Town, all of it's funded. So the issue is that management requires professional management and sort of merit-based appointments up to the top, not political friends of the people who've been elected in. So what we will require, I'm afraid there's no fundamental solution other than the electorate not being fooled by the people who are arguing for their vote.
Sure.
Don't be fooled. Look very hard at what you've got out of the people you put in the last election into power. Look what you got out of that. And if you got nothing and you got a mess, kick them out. Don't be fooled by rhetoric. Don't be fooled by some ideological nonsense that is actually used as a distraction in the vote. Look at the hard delivery, because municipality is about hard delivery, not political philosophy.
I think a very important message there. Prof, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for your candor as we continue to try and dissect what exactly it looks like